Senator Mike Nicholas, and now we are on bill number 32-33 COR, and I'm going to go ahead and recognize Senator Respicio. He's coming. Majority Leader Senator Respicio. You're recognized on bill number 32-33 COR, and I see in a corrected version here. Everybody have a copy on their desk?
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I move.
Sorry.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Again, I move to place Bill number 32-33 COR as corrected by the Prime Sponsor, amended and further amended by the Committee on Rules, Federal, Foreign, and Micronesian Affairs, Human and Natural Resources, Election Reform, and Capital District. And I move that this be placed in the third reading file.
On that motion, are there no objections? Motion carries. Senator Respicio.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker and colleagues. Bill number 32-33 COR was introduced in January, and I want to thank yourself and Speaker Wampat for being a co-sponsor. And I want to kind of explain to our colleagues and walk them through the genesis of this bill and how it's really evolved over time, but more specifically how it actually evolved even before it was introduced. When the Guam Economic Development Authority presented this bill to my office, the original draft called for the legislature to release that property over to the executive branch so they can begin the plans that will be consistent with Hagåtña redevelopment and restoration efforts. And certainly, I wasn't going to be supportive of that, knowing full well that the legislature still has particular needs for that area. And the governor, thankfully, said that that wasn't a deal breaker for him, in a sense that the legislature did not need to release the rights to that property in order for this bill to move forward. So already, even before the bill was introduced, there was some concessions that were made and some consensus that occurred. We've held 3 public meetings on this bill. We held 3 public hearings / roundtable meetings, and I want to recognize the participation of all the individuals over the last several months who support the bill, but I also want to recognize our colleague here in particular, and former Senator Hope Cristobal, who raised concerns at the very first public hearing that we had. And I want to say that as someone who's been involved in the legislative process for quite some time, I certainly take the position that whenever someone expresses concern over anything that we do, listening to those concerns only will make the bill or the legislative effort better. Now, granted, the bill is still calling for the demolition of the Manuel L. Guerrero administration building. The amended version I'm presenting before us certainly is because of the concerns that were raised over the last several months with respect to, as Senator Frank Uggan first advised me early on in the bill's introduction, to call Governor Guerrero's family into the first public hearing to reiterate the stance that the legislature took some time ago when there was a public law that identified that area to be the Governor Manuel F. L. Guerrero administration building. And so Governor Guerrero's children participated at that public hearing, and as a result, the amended bill would require that the Historic Preservation Trust, together with the Hagåtña Redevelopment and Restoration Authority, shall construct the monument and develop and approve the verbiage for that commemorative monument, recognizing the namesake of that area. The other thing that I was concerned about is what happens after the building is demolished and what would happen to that space. I certainly don't want to see it be a space where you have overgrown grass or the area is not maintained. So as a result, The amended version, again, would call for proper landscaping, planting of grass, trees, ground lighting, above ground lighting, walkways, sidewalks, park benches, other park amenities, to ensure that the site remains open to the public, and for the development and construction of a commemorative monument within the demolition site, which I just talked about earlier. We also were able to hear from the Department of Public Works, the Guam Environmental Protection Agency, and the DPW director has gone on the record that to restore that building, just to bring it up to code, would cost anywhere from 17 million to 25 million, Madam Speaker, and the end result of that would mean that the building would only have another 10 years in its lifespan versus the alternative of starting from the ground up. And so I present this amended version. I want to say that this is not being done in a vacuum, that there's collaboration and support from the executive branch, but also the community had many opportunities to weigh in on the discussion. And as a result, again, I'm presenting this amended version that certainly is consistent with the plans to revitalize Hagåtña. And a committee report has been submitted and filed, and as you can see, it's rather thick here, and all the concerns raised and support for the bill and objections are also contained in this committee report. So I'll reserve, whatever else I have to say for my closing, and I'm prepared to address any concerns our colleagues may have. But I want to say that in order for this bill to move forward, it first had to receive the support of the governor, the governor's office, the Guam Economic Development Authority, the Public Works, EPA, HRRA, other departments and agencies, together with the Guam Preservation Officer, the State Historic Preservation Officer, and at least 8 members of this legislature, which I'm hoping for, Madam Speaker and colleagues, that this bill would get the support it needs so that we can finally make the tough decision with respect to what's going to happen with that particular building. It's been not an easy decision, I admit, and it's just something that I find to be in a very difficult situation because, alternatively, what is there? What's the solution to have that government structure there, Madam Speaker, with blight, and it's just been a absolute eyesore. And many people have said, well, the legislature should have maintained that building over the years, but as you know, although the legislature has been a landlord to the area and to that building, there was not a single dollar appropriated to maintain that building, nor was there a single dollar paid for in rent by these government departments and agencies. And so they had the benefit of occupying that space, and we had the burden of trying to even maintain the surrounding area. And so that's the situation we find ourselves in, and we have an opportunity here by way of Bill 32-33 to utilize some of the hotel occupancy tax bond money, the balance thereof, to demolish the building, provide for usable open space, like I mentioned, the landscaping, the park benches and whatnot, so that way it will be open and accessible and remain available to the public. Otherwise, you just have a structure there that's going to cost, again, upwards of $17 to $25 million just to bring it to code. And the committee report certainly reflects the position of the Guam Preservation Officer, which he says you don't necessarily have to put the building in the historic registry, but you can petition to have the space part of the registry. You have the State Historic Preservation Officer who said that the building has no historical significance, so that's why over the years it was never even nominated, and there's a process to nominate these buildings, to put these buildings on these kinds of registries. And so every question I believe any of our colleagues will raise this afternoon, I could tell you more than likely has been asked over the last several months in those series of public meetings and have been addressed by the administration and by particularly the preservation trust. And so I submit this bill, and I leave it to the will of the body to decide the fate of that Manuel Guerrero building. But we've certainly done our due diligence, and we've done everything we can pursuant to the requirements of the open government law to just put this before our people. And the final product, by way of 32-33, as corrected and further amended, is the evolution and the conclusion of those series of public meetings. So I thank you for the opportunity to present this bill, and I'm certainly looking forward to the support of our colleagues, and so we can decide once and for all what's going to happen with that building. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Majority Leader. Vice Speaker Cruz, anyone else wishing to speak on the main motion? If not, Vice Speaker Cruz, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I didn't think the day would finally come, but I think we've succeeded in beating me to the ground. I no longer have any strength. So I will, without having the members suffer my rereading of my letter, my dear colleague letter to you, just begin first with a motion to send the bill back to committee and ask that my dear colleague letter be included in the record as my position for requesting that this bill go back to committee. I can see that I'm not going to get 7 votes, but I will at least make the effort. I wrote to all of you and explained, maybe too prosaically, my position. And before I launch into a series of amendments, I think I should follow through with my dear colleague letter and at least ask for that this bill first go back to committee, and then depending on that, we'll decide where we go from there.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. There has been a motion raised by the Vice Speaker to move Bill number 32-33 COR as corrected and by the prime sponsor and amended and further amended by the Committee on Rules. Are there any objections? There's an objection. On the motion, Senator Nicholas, you're recognized. There has been an objection, but you may speak.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I had, that there's a lot of things that I'm weighing with respect to this question. For me, I'm trying to get a firm grasp as to what the cost is for either scenario that we're basically contemplating here, which is if we demolish this building and we were to construct a new facility, whatever that may be in the future, do we have an idea of what costs we're looking at for that whole process? Or if we're going to try and renovate the building, do we have an idea of what the costs are going to be for that process? Because for me, I'd like to get a clear understanding as to, the dollars and cents of what we're evaluating here. I mean, of course, there's a lot of historical significance. There's the question of revitalization and dealing with blight, and all of those things are important. For me, I'd like to really understand what are the numbers that we're talking about here. If we continue with Bill 32, and we demolish the building and then maybe in the future something new is erected there, what's the total cost of what we're talking about in terms of demolition and building something new? And if we don't demolish it and we renovate it, what's the total cost there as well? And the reason why I like to bring this question up is because if I'm going to vote to move this back to committee, then it'll basically put on hold the process of demolishing and moving forward. And for me, to cast that vote, I would like to understand, the dollars and cents behind either moving this forward or sending it back to committee for a possible reconsideration of renovation of the facility. So I guess I would like to ask the question of the author of the legislation, or even the retiring speaker, if we have any numbers as to the cost of demolition and building a new facility versus the cost of renovating the existing facility.
Thank you, Senator San Nicolas. I will ask Senator Respicio, would you like to yield to the inquiry?
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I thank the retiring speaker for the question. That issue was brought up at the hearing that we had last night on the status update for the whole Hagåtña redevelopment and revitalization plan. And you know, they're at a point in this process, in the process to develop the plan and to have it ultimately approved by this legislature. They have not made any determinations with respect to how much it would cost to construct a new building. But what I do know is that it'll cost about $600,000 to demolish the building, and it'll cost an additional amount of money to do the landscaping and the light landscaping and the lighting. But the way I see this, Madam Speaker, and although the question is certainly a valid question, the way I see it is whatever the plans end up looking like for the Hagåtña redevelopment and restoration, the current Department of Administration building, or the Governor Manuel Guerrero building, is not consistent with what those plans call for. They're saying that the cost-wise, it's going to cost 17 to 25 million just to bring it to code, not including additional costs for renovating insides or to make it available for government offices. But then the lifespan of all that work and all those millions of dollars pumped into just to bring it up to code, they've said that it would only be about 10 years. So we're all faced with a decision as to, do we continue to put money into a building of that kind of situation and of that kind of condition, only to have it available for another decade, or is there going to be some opportunity to build a building from the ground up, to have it designed and retrofit to meet the current needs of this government, to bring back those departments and agencies that moved out of the building and have them come back and be tenants there, so they won't be renting outside. And that's the same goal that we have for this legislative body and our own fiscal condition. But with respect to the question, I think I'm seeing this as a multi-pronged approach, that in order to even talk about whatever the future of that area is going to look like, it does not include maintaining the current Manuel Guerrero building, only because it's not practical, only because of the current structure that's there and the footprint that's required to move forward with things the governor talked about with the Palacio and other ideas for that area. So for me, I've weighed it out, and I think the most prudent thing to do is being presented in Bill 32 as amended. So I thank you for the question.
Thank you, Senator Respicio. Senator San Nicolas, you still have the floor. Will that answer suffice?
It does give me a sense of direction as to what we're talking about here. I just, I look at this and I kind of weigh it to other decisions we've made in the past as well, Madam Speaker. A decision was made to enter into an agreement with respect to a 50-year-old building in Tizen that we have turned into a high school that we're paying a large amount of money for over a very extended period of time. And it actually is 10 times more than the cost of bringing this current building to code, and it's 3 times longer than the useful life that's even projected for this current building that we're discussing. So I'm really trying to use historical context when we weigh the decision of what's happening with this current building, how much is it going to cost, and what's the best financial decision for us to make, notwithstanding the important historical significance and everything else. But we did. There was an agreement to move forward with purchasing on a municipal basis through appropriations a 50-year-old building up in Tizen for a high school, and that 50-year-old building wasn't brand new construction. A lot of it was renovations to existing facilities. And we're expecting or we're paying for that over a very long period of time, longer than 10 years. And if we were able to step back as a government and justify that as a sound economic investment for our people, then I really need to understand why a $17 to $25 million renovation to this building, the Guerrero building, would not be as equally weighed in terms of being a sound investment for our people. So I'm going to continue to listen, Madam Speaker, but for me, that's where I'm at in terms of making this decision. I have no doubt that the Hagåtña Restoration and Redevelopment Authority will do a tremendous job of working with the necessary players to build a proper monument to honor our Governor Guerrero. But I also need to understand, if we're going to demolish this building and build a new one, what are the total costs that we're looking at? And we haven't gotten a firm handle on that. We do know $600,000 is going to be what the cost of demolition is going to amount to. We know there's going to be additional costs for landscaping and the putting in of sidewalks. But when we do go to the next phase of actually building something new, is that going to be another bond? And is that going to be another long-term expense? And what exactly will we be placing in that location? And is it going to be more than 25 million? How much more than 25 million? What's the square footage going to be like? And what's the operational use going to be? I mean, with this building that we're talking about demolishing, we had the entire Department of Administration and Department of Education in there. And granted, their circumstances weren't ideal, but we did have two agencies housed in this one building. So I'm looking at it from an investment perspective. Where do we go, and what's the highest and best use of the people's money? A $25 million expense versus an unknown variable expense that may require additional borrowing in the future for an unknown purpose, at least for me at this time. I'm trying to reconcile the idea of demolishing, because once we demolish this building, there's no going back. You can't go back and renovate a building that we've already demolished. And so Bill 32-33 will set us on a course to either demolish it and have green space, which would be nice in the capital, or demolish it and use that space for the construction of something new. And I'd like to know what the ultimate anticipated costs are, how we're going to go about financing those costs, and how I can weigh that against the idea of renovating the existing structure. But I will also take into serious consideration, Madam Speaker, the reality that the sponsor mentioned about how the existing building does not incorporate well into the plans of the Hagåtña Restoration and Redevelopment Authority. And when we're talking about big picture planning, it's important for us to also understand that we need everything, all the right pieces to fit into place. Because also the last thing we're going to want to do as a legislature is deviate from that plan in a way that's going to throw the entire thing off. So I have a lot to think about, but I appreciate the response from the sponsor of the bill, and I look forward to more discussion. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Senator San Nicolas. On the motion, Senator Underwood, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I actually have a follow-up question regarding the estimate for renovating the building. And my question is, how many companies had made the assessment? Was this a single assessment made by one company, or were there 2 or 3 companies that made the same assessment, so that we have a sense of reliability on the $25 million estimate?
Senator Respicio, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Senator. I'll yield to the question. All we have is a statement from the Director of Public Works, and he's put that number in writing, so clearly he stands by those estimations that he provided. There was no company or there was no formal process to make this determination other than the feedback that we received from the Department of Public Works, which we know is the government agency that's responsible with this kind of work. And so these numbers came from the Department of Public Works, and the Director has put that to us in writing, and it's part of the committee report.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Underwood. Anyone else on the amendment? Senator Morrison, you're recognized.
Oh,
On the motion to refer back, on the main motion. Okay, there is a motion to refer back. Anybody else? Would you like to speak on?
Yeah, just very quickly, I just want to not only register my objection to the Vice Speaker's motion to refer this bill back to committee, but also say that I want my response that I submitted to him to be also made part of the record, and I'll provide a copy of that. I object to returning this bill back to committee, Madam Speaker and colleagues, because we spend this should come as no surprise to anybody. The bill was introduced in January. Again, we had a series of public hearings / roundtable meetings. All of these questions that are coming up were addressed at those hearings that we had, and I just think that as the previous speaker said, what's the goal in putting this back to committee? Is it going to delay the fate of the Manuel Guerrero building? Is it going to prevent the Haggaña Redevelopment and Restoration Authority from moving forward to ultimately present those plans to the legislature? I do want to say that if we do pass this bill and the administration moves forward in demolishing the building, it's going to be consistent with the overall effort to revitalize Haggaña. So we're not going to be doing something, and I certainly won't regret that action, because I believe that what we're doing in this amended bill is consistent with the greater plan for the city of Haggaña. So I object to the motion to bring this back to committee.
Thank you, Majority Leader. Anyone else on the Vice Speaker's motion? If not, Vice Speaker, you may close.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I thank the two earlier speakers that questioned why this was done. And that's exactly the reason why I think this has to go back. Because, with all due respect to the Director of Public Works and the engineer that he asked, it was, as the Director of Public Works, in his question to the engineer, can you take a shot at telling us how much it's going to cost? There was no review. It was, in fact, a text message that was received. And subsequently, in a FOIA response to me, said in writing what that amount was. So I'm not sure if we can and should give weight to that amount. That's the reason why I'm asking for it to go back. I'm also asking to get to go back because the first question that was asked by the senator from Delgado. We had no problem agreeing to pay over $200 million for renovated buildings in Teason, which were barracks. This building in Haggaña was built as an office building. It has withstood everything. I was in that building as a legal counsel in '76 when we had Typhoon Pamela. The only window that blew out was the window in my office because a tree limb broke from the tree outside in the park and came through the window. Otherwise, that building stood. No windows broke. Government House imploded. But the Manuel F. Leon Guerrero building stood. When we had the 8.1 earthquake, the building stood. Yesterday, Madam Speaker, you were with us when we went to the hospital. We're investing anywhere, at least we've committed to 7, and it probably will run us $12 million for the renovations that we're doing in just that small section in the labor delivery. But we had no problems with that. We had no problems funding the renovation of the hospital for the emergency room and for the ICU. That was another 10 million. When we had the hearing on the labor and delivery room here, the hospital told us they needed $43 million for capital improvement, for renovations in the building, capital renovations in the building. And that didn't include the request yesterday that the interim administrator's asking for renovation of the OR room, which will completely renovate the second floor of the hospital. The senator from Guerrero asked the most cogent question of the day. What are we going to have when we finish? We will have an open space. We will have a building raised to the ground, and we have no idea or how much it's going to cost to replace anything that is being planned. And I stress being planned, because no one, at least even last night, could tell us what the plans are. It's all concept. I don't know how we could say that the demolition is in concert with the plans, because no plans have been approved. This bill is too premature to be deliberated on the floor, and so I ask my colleagues to please join me in sending it back to committee. Thank you.
There was a motion to refer the bill back to committee and also to attach the letter that was sent by the Vice Speaker. There has been an objection, so I'm going to call for the vote. All those in favor of the referring it back to the committee, please signify.
Point of order, Madam Speaker.
Yes.
Can we bifurcate the motion if the sponsor will agree? I think the letter should be part of the record, no matter what happens with the motion to send the bill back to committee.
So would
So
you
I'm
do?
not objecting that the letter be made part of the record.
Are you asking for the letter and the response, Majority Leader, or
Both,
just?
because if this motion doesn't pass, then I'm just to think that the letter will not be included in the record. I want both letters to be included in the record, and then address the
I'll
motion
go ahead and
as
accept
well.
that motion, but for both.
To bifurcate.
Yeah,
the
I'm going to
question.
fabricate it. So on the motion to fabricate, no objection, motion carries. So the first motion is to accept
The
the
letters.
Vice Speaker's letter to this body, August body, and also the response from the Majority Leader. Are there any objections? Those were the letters that were sent to all of you and the response from the Majority Leader. No objection? Motion carries. On the Vice Speaker's motion to refer back, there was an objection, so I'm going to call for the vote. All those in favor to refer it back, please signify by raising your hand. One, two, come on, guys, pick up your hands. 7. Motion fails. Vice Speaker, you still have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I have several amendments.
Vice Speaker, have you made copies already?
Yes,
Okay.
they're being distributed now. Madam Speaker, my first amendment is as to the effective date. As was stated by the mover of the bill, there is no plan that has been adopted or approved as was stated by this legislature. So my first amendment is that this act shall be effective only upon y Legislatura en Guajan's adoption of the Hagåtña Master Plan prepared by the Hagåtña Restoration and Redevelopment Authority. For the purposes of this section, adoption shall mean the passage of a legislative measure signed into law by Magatlahin Guajan. We keep saying that the demolition of this building is in concert with the plan for Hagåtña. I have not seen a plan. This legislature has not approved a plan. And until we see a plan that we can see that is in the demolition is in concert with, then I don't think we should be taking down any building. Madam Speaker, I was not the one that said that this was not that there is no plan that's been approved by this legislature. It was stated. I was not the one that said that this demolition was in concert with the overall plan. I've not seen that plan. How we can say it's in concert with of a plan that does not exist escapes me. So I'm just asking as a start that the effective date of this bill be upon the date that this legislature receives a plan from HRRA and approves it and the governor signs it. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're welcome, Vice Speaker. On the Vice Speaker's amendment, I see Senator Tom Atta. Anybody else? Senator Tom Atta, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I stand in support of the amendment. I was at the public hearing last night, and basically I walked away from there was that they showed basically two concepts from two different groups who were asked to sit down and, brainstorm what they thought the Hagåtña redevelopment, at least in the cultural sector, should look like. And basically, that's the way it was described. These are just thinking out loud. These are just thoughts that were put on paper, but there's really nothing has been decided upon. Even the consultant that's spearheading this project here basically stepped back and disavowed and said, hey, we're not giving any kind of recommendations or anything about what's being conceptualized here. When asked about the question of, okay, if we're going to take step one here and do something with the Manuel F.L. Guerrero building, what are the other steps that's going to be taken? And they talked about demolishing the current precinct, removing the federal detention center. And when asked, well, what are the implications of doing all these? More specifically, the implications of carrying some of these concepts through to demolish, for example, the federal detention center, of which apparently there is some significant implications to doing, to taking that action. So right now everything is in such a state of flux, and we're kind of like, getting ahead of the pack here before things have been decided. And I think that this amendment, as to the effective date of, if we're going to demolish the Manuel F.L. Guerrero, that let's cross that bridge when all the other decisions have been made. But for now, it's really premature to make that decision, not knowing if in fact that master plan is going to include the preservation of the Manuel F.L. Guerrero building, or we're going to tear it down and put up basically a whatever monument there is to honor Manuel F.L. Guerrero and or whatever else we're going to do with that spot. So I think this certainly is in keeping with basically what was briefed last night, that maybe we're getting a little ahead of ourselves at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Ada. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on the amendment? Senator Respicio?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, Madam Speaker, it's really unnerving for me to sit here and accept that the idea in a bill that's amended, that's being presented, is premature, that we should not be deciding the fate of the Manuel F.L. Guerrero building unless the plan is developed. I mean, if I'm going to say anything nice about this amendment, is I would congratulate the author of this amendment in finding a way to prevent anything from moving forward. And I think that's where we're at. And this whole discussion by way of Bill 32 forces us to face this head on with eyes wide open and separate the issues. One issue is, what do you do with a building that's dilapidated, that's going to cost millions of dollars to just bring it up to code, not including what it's going to cost to renovate the inside and fix all the mold and things like that. Then on the other hand, you have the Hagåtña Redevelopment and Restoration Authority that's moving forward on its plan to revitalize the city of Hagåtña. One can't happen without the other. The people who are developing this plan and the concepts of this plan, although the plan has not been approved, I never said that the plan was approved, but every rendition that we saw so far does not include the current DOA building, does not include the current structure that we see that's been an eyesore. And for me, I'm looking at this as one opportunity to force the issue to finally resolve once and for all how every time we have to drive by, how that building is just been an eyesore. And if anyone looked at what these plans are, or the development of the plan, it does not include the maintaining of that building as it stands now. The governor's idea to have the Palazzo would just encompass the whole footprint of the current building that's there. So I'm asking us to not look at this initiative as being premature. I'm asking us to be mature in a sense that we have to decide once and for all. Instead of kicking the can down the road, it would be convenient for me to say, wow, I support this amendment because it prevents me from having to make a decision today. And to say that my decision will be contingent upon someone else's action, so politically I'm covered. But I stand in opposition to the amendment simply because we have to make this decision, Madam Speaker, and I'm bringing this bill forward, and if there's 8 votes to go forward, fine. If there's 8 votes to kill it, fine. But I think this amendment is really, from my perspective, certainly disingenuous to the point that it says nothing can happen unless a plan is approved by the legislature and signed by the governor, when we have to decide what really should be done with the building, notwithstanding what the other ideas are for the area. What should we do to that building? And that issue has to be resolved once and for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Majority Leader. Anyone else on the amendment? Senator San Nicolas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm really trying to reconcile the amendment because basically what it says is we're not going to demolish the building until a plan is adopted by the Hagåtña Redevelopment and Restoration Authority. And so what we're going to effectively do is, I mean, let's say the plan doesn't get adopted for, 5 years. That building then is going to sit there for 5 years. And then I really am trying to reconcile in my mind, do we go about putting money into renovating that building when there already is a provision in law that is going to automatically have it demolished once a plan is adopted? That causes concern for me, because with this amendment, what we will be effectively doing is, yes, you won't tear it down until the plan is adopted, but that also means we're not going to do anything to the building until the plan is adopted. Because it would be foolish for us to put any money into renovating that building at this point, knowing full well that all we need is for the plan to be adopted, and every single dollar that we spend on renovating the building is going to come crashing down in that building's demolition. So I guess I would like to pose a question to the author of the amendment. What course are we going to be setting ourselves on? Because if we have this amendment in place and the bill passes, are we effectively then killing any intention to renovate the building in the future? Because this amendment and this bill, if both go together and they pass, is basically just belaying the demolition of the building until a plan is adopted, but it still doesn't change the fact that we're going to be demolishing the building at all. So whether we demolish it after the plan or we demolish it before, we're going to demolish it. So is it just requiring us to have that building sit there until the plan is adopted, and no matter what, it's going to be demolished, so we're just going to deal with it sitting there? I mean, so if I could yield to the author to help me understand how would this amendment help us to come to terms with either demolishing the building or renovating it?
Thank you, Senator San Nicolas. Vice Speaker, would you like to yield?
Yes. Actually, Madam Speaker, I'm trying to make it clear that as a policymaker, my aim is not ready, fire, aim. We are the legislature. The executive branch has already awarded a contract for a consultant for, I think, $3 million for the restoration and renovation of Agana. They can move that along if they want. The effective date could be in 3 months. If they decide to move the consultant, to move the plans through, and we know what we're going to do in that capital area. It doesn't help for the consultant to come in and tell us, oh, no, that's concept 1 and that's concept 2, and it's only a concept, and it's only from attendees, but we haven't talked to anybody. I even pointed out to them that I went and told them I wasn't going to participate until I saw what they were planning on doing and had discussions with them. And they had the nerve to list me as an attendee trying to validate their plan. They have a consultant. They have a fully functioning board. They have everybody on their side. Historic Preservation Trust wants to demolish the building so it could dig under it and find out what archaeological digs there are there. All the agencies are in line. I am not the governor. He can move it. He had everybody in here last week. Move the plan and let's see what the plan is and let's approve it. And then we'll see whether or not the plan that finally is adopted by HRRA includes demolition of the building. Because those 2 concepts the other day indicated that it was, but it was just concept. It had not been approved. And all I'm saying is, finish your work. Tell me your plan is to do this. You can start on your plaza, because I've explained to everybody and I've shown everybody who knows anything about the plaza. If you want to start, you can build the palazzo tomorrow. Because the 145 feet that it's taking for the palazzo would run from the left edge of the azotea and end 15 feet from the administration building. So if you want phase 1 and you want to do the palazzo, start. Where are you going to get your money? I don't know. But you can start that. And when they finish with the rest of the plan, and it says take down those 2 buildings, and this legislature votes to take down those 2 buildings, because that's the plan, then fine. But right now, we have no plan. To say that this amendment is disingenuous, it's disingenuous to say that that it's in concert with a plan, because there is no plan. There are concepts that we have no idea how many hundreds of millions of dollars it's going to cost us to build. That's all I'm asking for. And they have the ability to be able to move it. If they want to move it, they can get their consultant to complete their plan, submit it to the HRRA, have the HRRA approve it, submit it to us, and we could be voting on it in the next couple of months. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Sitos Masi, Vice Speaker. Senator San Nicolas, you still have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the insight from the retiring speaker. For me, this is what I understand is going to happen with or without this amendment. There's going to be a demolition. If the bill passes without the amendment, there's going to be demolition immediately. If it passes with the amendment, there's going to be a demolition after the plan is adopted. But either way, there's still going to be a demolition. The amendment, as it stands on its own, wouldn't change that in any way. And so my concern is, if we're just going to have a demolition, whether now or when a plan is adopted, all we're doing is we're delaying the demolition until such time that the plan is actually adopted. But there still will be a demolition, unless, of course, for some strange reason, all this work over the years that we've put into redevelopment and restoration just gets scrapped entirely, which I do not in any way foresee. Because a lot of these redevelopment and restoration initiatives are of high value to our capital district revival. So there will be a plan eventually adopted. We will be demolishing eventually. So why are we just going to wait? Unless the bill fails, which means there's no demolition at all, and that's something else entirely. But if we're going to pass this bill, it doesn't do anybody any good for us to just force the building to sit there until the plan is adopted. Because again, knowing full well we're going to demolish it not today, but whenever the plan is adopted, then that means we're not going to put a single dollar into fixing it up. As a matter of fact, every dollar we spend to maintain it, every dollar we spend to secure it, every dollar we spend having police go over there to clear out any people who are living there squatting, that's all resources that we're going to continue to expend while we're eventually waiting to ultimately demolish the building, which will happen once the plan is adopted. So we're demolishing now or demolishing later, but we're still demolishing. And I think there's more carrying costs for this government for us to be delaying the demolition of the building if that's the course that we're going to be setting this entire process on. So I don't see how the amendment will change that course. It will delay the action, but if we're going to adopt a plan, this amendment says once a plan is adopted and signed into law, then we demolish. So if we're going to adopt a plan, and if it's going to get signed, then we're going to eventually demolish. So why are we going to continue to have to deal with the burden of all the carrying costs of that dead asset while we're waiting for that to happen? So the real question becomes: are we going to demolish it or not? Not are we going to demolish it now or later? And if that's the question that we're going to have to answer with respect to this amendment, I'm not comfortable incurring additional carrying costs on a dead asset only to demolish it later. I mean, if we're going to do it, then let's do it. So I do have issues with the amendment. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator San Nicolas. Senator Mary Torres on the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to ask a question, point of inquiry to the author of the floor amendment. In looking at the committee report and in consideration of a lot of the testimony that I witnessed during the roundtable meetings, many of the opposers to the demolition of the building were citing historic concerns. And I just wanted to offer the question to the author, is it resolved by the Guam State Historic Preservation Officer that this building is in fact not a building that is has any chance of ever being on the Registry of Historic Places or ever being eligible for restoration or preservation funds? Because I think that then sets the tone of whether in fact this building has any chance of being saved from demolition. So I ask that the author of the floor amendment please answer whether in fact historic preservation concerns have been fully vetted and if that is absolute.
Thank you, Senator Torres. I will ask, so you want the author of the amendment, not the author of the bill?
I think perhaps both can answer the question, but I
I'll go
offer
ahead
it
and
first to the author of the amendment first.
Thank you. Vice Speaker, you first.
I thank the senator from Santa Rita for asking the question, Madam Speaker, and I do yield. I will admit to my colleagues that I was derelict over the last 10 years in not moving to place this building on the registry. Until everybody moved out last year, I did not realize that there were plans to destroy the building. I have introduced Bill 86, which the good chairman of Natural Resources is scheduled for hearing next week, to determine whether or not we're going to have that building placed on the registry. Last night, is it 2 nights ago, the judiciary hosted a meeting to determine whether a building that was built subsequent to the Hagåtña building, to the Manuel F. Guerrero building, is going to be placed on the registry. Guam Historic Preservation Trust gave the judiciary a grant to hire a professor from the university to write up the documentation and the rationale for saving that building. Unfortunately, I did not make the same request of historic preservation, and I have not hired a professor to write up the rationale. I have, in my own simple way, attempted to explain some of the historical significance. Admittedly, I'm not a historian, and so it's probably not thorough enough. But that doesn't mean that it cannot and will not ever be placed on the registry. I've asked Historic Preservation to explain to me why it could not ever be, and it was just the fact that admittedly we as members of the legislature over the last 10 years, since most of us have been here at least 10, did not make any effort to ask for money to list it. That's the only reason why it's not on the list. But even in my limited history, I can assure the members of this body that there is more history that deserves saving in those two buildings than there is in the Judicial Center. And I worked in both. And it has nothing to do with me, but it has everything to do with the fact that in the Manuel F.L. Guerrero building, we had some of the greatest governors that have served this island. Hold office in that building. Make decisions for the population in that building. And so I think we should make every effort to try to get it listed. And now that I know the process, I'm sorry I didn't know what the process was before, but now that I do, I'm moving forward. But as was pointed out in the committee report, Senator Hope Cristobal pointed out to Historic Preservation that when they asked for their last grant, in their last grant they stated that the reason that they were asking for a continuation of their grant was to be able to document post-Organic Act governance on this island. Post-Organic Act governance on this island. And they listed as possible nominees in that document the Manuel F.L. Guerrero building, the Judiciary building, and Government House. To my surprise, neither the Historic Preservation Officer nor the SHPO had read their own website, which listed the grant and why they got their grant for. Thankfully, the SHPO had a smartphone and Googled it and realized that Senator Cristobal was right. That the basis of the grant for the SHPO and for the Historic Preservation Office was for the specific purpose of documenting and preserving post-Organic Act governance on this island. And some of our greatest leaders, our first leaders more importantly, even if we don't take away that adjective of greatest, our first leaders, when we as Chamorros finally stood up for ourselves, governed ourselves after 400 years, was from that building. It can and should be on the registry. The application for the federal grant states it. And besides my being derelict, I think the Preservation Trust and its SHPO are both derelict also.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. Senator Torres, I'm sorry. I'm going to ask Majority Leader Respicio to go ahead and also respond.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll also take the opportunity to yield to the question and say that this discussion that the Senator from Santa Rita is asking came up at our roundtable hearings. And just to clarify, the State Historic Preservation Officer said that the building was never nominated, nor did it go through this process to get it on the historic registry because it was of no historical significance. And the examples that the Vice Speaker pointed out, or his comments that this is the basis to which they applied for their grant, the SHPO later clarified that that was just used as an example, that examples such as the Judicial Building, the Manuel F.L. Guerrero Building, but never to say that they were going to go pursue to have these buildings nominated. And so I also want to say that there's a statutory process by which these buildings get on the registry. to do it by legislation is for an entirely different discussion. So I just want to say that I think this question has been vetted not only by the Guam Preservation Trust, but also by the State Historic Preservation Officer, by the architects, by the historians, from that perspective, to say that the building was first built for a military barracks. So if we're going to wrap our arms around this whole idea of self-determination and self-governance without recognizing that that building was built by the federal government for military barracks, then what are we accomplishing here by trying to preserve a building that's in that kind of condition? You look at the committee report, it's there.
Senator, hi.
Okay.
Go ahead and address the chair,
My-
please. Thank you.
Thank you. But I was just reiterating what they testified to and how that building and the purposes of that building's construction.
I'm gonna go ahead and,
I think we should correct history, Madam Speaker. Unfortunately, I was alive at the time.
okay.
And the fact that the historians are too ignorant is not my fault. If they look at the history of the building, and I'll call for the book that was published on the building. There was never a barracks in the Ganya. I'm not sure what revisionist history that was, but it's not even revisionist, it's delusional. That building was built by Governor Lowell. He started it. It was finished during the administration of Governor Joseph Flores and was inhabited by Governor Daniels after that. Anybody who's been in that building knows it was never a barracks. We might be mistaken in that I have brought up the fact that we had no problem on this floor voting to buy a $200 million barracks that has been turned into a school. That had more environmental problems and structural problems than this building ever had. After we broke this morning, Madam Speaker, a gentleman in his late 70s came running into my office, apologized for the way that he was dressed, but he said that he was down at the cemetery fixing his brother's grave. But he had to come down, and in spite of the fact that the way that he was dressed, had to come and tell me, you have to save that building. Do you know one other fact that you haven't brought up, Senator? And I said, I don't know. What? And he goes, that building was built by Chamorros. That building was built in 1959 before we had H2 labor, save for the Camp Rojas group. He said the artisans, the craftsmen that did work that building were Chamorros. He said, you've got to save it. And I said, well, I'll try. But Madam Speaker, I had to rise to correct that incorrect statement about that building. It was never intended to be a barracks. It was always intended to be the seat of government for the people of Guam.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. I'm going to go ahead and still, Senator Respicio, are you, Senator Mary Torres, both Speaker, Vice Speaker, and Majority Leader have answered the questions to, would that suffice for you? And would you like, you still have the floor.
Wanted to thank both speakers, senators, for addressing my concerns. And in the time that they were speaking, and I was also reflecting on the committee report, what is apparent to me is that the Guam Preservation Trust and the State Historic Preservation Office both opined that the building is not of historic significance, so that there is an opinion already about the building, but not necessarily a dismissal of the site and the significance of the events that occurred on that site. So I appreciate both. It's a very difficult and emotional decision, I think, for all of us as an island, whether we support or not support the demolition of a building. And for me, it was important for me to rise and raise the question, because I think that when we talk about plans and buildings and things that may come in the future, a lot of us are very concerned about things that may be lost in the process of advancing and modernizing. And I believe, though, that what we have not and are not going to be letting go is the significance of the events that occurred on the site. And for that, I believe that I'm at least comfortable that we are aware of history, and that we will make an effort together with the Guam Preservation Trust and the State Historic Preservation Office to preserve those historic and significant milestones in the history of the Chamorro people. Suzuis Masi, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Torres. Senator Larissa, on the amendment? On the amendment? Yes, you're recognized.
Speaker, in listening to the previous speakers, I know that I'm equally concerned about taking steps to demolish a building without a plan. And that's the struggle that I have right now, notwithstanding the statement by the previous speaker that the concern regarding the amendment that states that the act shall only be effective once the legislature has adopted a master plan, and that it was going to be demolished anyway. So because of my concern that we really should have a plan before we take any action, and because of the significance of the building, when I personally just am kind of attached to that building, because when I was growing up, that was where my parents would go to pay or do some transactions, and it used to be like open air. Not only that, but I spent many years as an administrator of research planning and evaluation, and also as superintendent, and we occupied that building, and that really has had some very, very good memories as an educator. But I want to propose an amendment to the amendment in light of the concerns about having a plan, and then the possibility of demolishing the demolishing the building irrespective of the plan. So I would like to propose that this act shall be effective only if the adoption of the Hagåtña Master Plan requires the demolition of the building. So what I'm proposing here is that we will still consider the significance of the building as we develop the plan, and it would only be demolished if the plan that we come up with, right, or the Hagåtña Master Plan, if they come up with a plan that would require it, that would be when we would demolish it. So that would be the condition. And so, Madam Speaker, I am proposing this amendment that this act shall be effective only if the adoption of the Hagåtña Master Plan requires the demolition of the building.
Does everybody understand that? On the, okay, I have two. There's the Underwood Amendment to the amendment, so I'll recognize Senator Frank Uggan and then Assistant Majority Leader Senator Tom Mata. Senator
you.
Frank Uggan.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and good afternoon to you and our fellow colleagues. You know, I'm sitting here and listening intently to the nature of the conversation in this hall. I understand the amendment that is being proffered, but one of the statements that was mentioned by a previous speaker is, where is the plan? And you know, Madam Speaker, in the code, the Hagåtña Restoration Authority has a statute or a mandate for the formulation of a plan. 2 sections following that, and that was passed in 1997. Madam Speaker, that section of the code was passed in 1997. And if you would like me to directly reference exactly what I'm talking about, Madam Speaker, it's section 79303 in reference to the Hagåtña Restoration and Restoration Board. Subsection 79302 says Hagåtña Restoration and Redevelopment Plan, added by Public Law 24-110 in 1997. And then, subsequent to that, 2 sections later, it requires, Madam Speaker, the adoption of that plan, subsection 79304, approval by the governor and the Guam Legislature. So since 1997, there's been a statute or a requirement that in fact a plan be presented to this body via the governor's office. The amendment that the mover, or the amendment to the primary amendment, Madam Speaker, I have no objection to. But then again, it goes back to the very heart of why a plan is necessary when you're looking at the restoration and the reconstruction and the revitalization of Hagåtña. And the idea is not that the governor is going to approve it and then forward it to the legislature. To me, the whole heart of the discussion is not that this body is going to take that plan and adopt it. To me, it goes back to the fundamentals of why we are here. Madam Speaker, is so that the people of Guam would know and understand exactly what Hagåtña is, not only today, but what the plans are to ensure restoration and revitalization of this capital city of Guam. That's the heart of the plan in terms of the process. Making sure that our people consent and recognize that Hagåtña will be revitalized, Hagåtña will be restored by virtue of this authority and the expansive authority granted to the Hagåtña Restoration Board. But the people of Guam should be on board too. It's not taking concepts and every now and then presenting it to this legislative body and adopting it, because that could be an approach. That has been an approach. And I commend the pathway that has been established in terms of the walk through Hagåtña, because I thought that that was an excellent idea that was advocated by the authority and carried out, and I believe supported by the Guam Preservation Trust. But Madam Speaker, the amendment to the amendment, I have no issues with. The formulation of a plan so that our people would be at the heart of understanding exactly what that plan is, I think is the crust, really is the focus of this amendment to the amendment and the primary amendment, so that in fact we can move forward with either the demolition of the Governor Manuel Guerrero building or the restoration of that particular structure to be inclusive of the entire Hagåtña city here. as our capital city so that we can continue to stand proud. There was a comment that, and I will close with this, Madam Speaker, because with all due respect to the statement that was rendered, and our colleague was sharing with us some information, and I went to the sponsor of the primary amendment, and I was trying to understand this statement that was made, that representatives from the Guam Historic Preservation Trust, with all due respect to their expertise, as well as the SHPO office, and I'm going to paraphrase this, and I apologize if I take it out of line, stated that there's a recognition of the events, the historical events that have taken place in that structure, the Manuel Guerrero building, but that there is no historical significance to that building. And I take difference to that. I have a concern, or I would like to share that I differ with that. If, in fact, laws are being promulgated and advocated and passed in this body, in this building, albeit a temporary building, Madam Speaker, history is not only being made here, but this is a historical structure, albeit it's a privately owned structure. What the landlord does with it is up to him or her. But when we're talking about a public facility that belongs to the people of Guam, that has historical significance, that has to be a major issue that should be discussed and rightfully is being discussed this afternoon. But I wanted to share that perspective, Madam Speaker, because we keep talking about piecemealing this approach and involving our people, but are we able to formulate that plan? If you don't have a plan, it's going to take another year, then present that information to this body so that we can understand. The plan is not going to happen for another year, then we need to piecemeal some of these approaches, and perhaps it would affect the Manuel Guerrero governor's building. But if you have a plan, you're working a plan, you presented some of the concepts last evening in a presentation to members of this body, then that plan really should go through the adjudication process. Get the people to understand exactly what those proposals are. Get the chief executive, the governor of Guam, to sign off on that. Forward it to this body so that ultimately we can make that decision and proceed forward. Because when it comes to funding that plan, the people of Guam would understand that they were at the heart of the formulation of that plan in terms of restoring and revitalizing this capital city of Guam. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Yes. While they're still making copies of the Senator Underwood Amendment, I'm going to go ahead and address Senator Tom Atta, Assistant Majority Leader. You can speak on the issue.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I, you know, as intently as I'm trying to follow the discussions, I think the more intently I follow it, the more confused I'm starting to get. Because one, there seems to be this underlying presumption that Bill 32 is going to pass. And I don't know, maybe I'm looking through rose-colored glasses and, you know, that it's already in the bag. And if that's the case, let's end this, you know, let's end this and let's call for the vote, if in fact that is the case. So there seems to be this underlying presumption that Bill 32 is going to pass. Earlier, there was also a mention made that when the master plan gets approved for the restoration of Agana, that building is going, the demolition of that building is going to be included. That's a presumption, isn't it? And so I'm wondering, wow, why are we going on all these presumptions? And we're really getting so wrapped around the axle with this amendment, as if Bill 32 is in the bag and it's going to get approved. But if it doesn't get approved, it's all moot. We've had a good exercise in English articulation. So I just want to express that you know, I can't help but notice that there's this strong undercurrent of presumptuousness that Bill 32 is going to pass, and that when the master plan is finally adopted, that it's going to include in there the demolition of of that Manuel Guerrero building. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Assistant Majority Leader. I'm going to go ahead and ask anyone else wishing to speak. Yes, on the amendment to the amendment, Senator Respicio, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm of the presumption that Bill 32 will pass. I think that's what every sponsor of every bill presumes, that when they move their initiative forward, that there could be convincing arguments to the effect that there would be enough support to get the bill through. And so I hope my colleague, whatever side of the fence he's on, the previous speaker, I hope he would continue to have a open mind and recognize the value of Bill 32 as amended. So I'm going to presume that it's going to pass, but I'm not going to take for granted its passage, despite whatever undercurrents anyone may be feeling. I think I want to keep this body focused on the decision we have to make with respect to the fate of that building. And I understand the amendment by the good senator from Tamuning, but I want to clarify. The amendment is basically saying the act shall be effective only if the adoption of the Hagåtña Master Plan, I guess we would add, as prepared by the Hagåtña Restoration and Redevelopment Authority, requires the demolition of the building. What does this mean? If you are saying adoption, and the adoption is still being defined as passage of a legislative measure signed into law by Imagalahin Guahan, it's a 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. The amendment doesn't change anything to the original amendment. But if the desire if it's the mover's desire of this amendment to say, okay, if the adoption of the plan requires that the building be demolished, shouldn't we then clean up this amendment even further to simply say that, is it a plan that's going to be presented to the governor and to the legislature by the HRRA? Are we still saying that adoption is tied to a legislative measure that's signed into law? Because otherwise, if the sponsor would yield.
Senator Underwood, would you like to yield to Majority Leader?
Yes.
Thank you.
Madam Speaker, thank you for that question of clarification. Actually, what I am trying to say here with this amendment is that the act of destroying the building would only be in effect if the adopted Hagåtña Master Plan requires the demolition of that building. So maybe it shouldn't be the adoption, because the adoption would be the process, but the final product, the final plan requires the demolition of that building. By proposing this amendment, it still it addresses the concerns of those who note the historical significance of the building, but also addresses an openness to the possibility that it may the overall plan, the adopted plan may not require it. So, I mean, may not include this. So that's my intent. So I would amend my amendment. Wait.
I'll go ahead and work with Senator Respicio first based on that. Senator Respicio?
Thank you, and I thank the good senator for her clarification. But as we know, the process to get this plan adopted, as was presented last night, is a living, breathing document to who knows that whatever plan is forwarded to the legislature through our public comment process on our own and through every single opportunity every member has, can make any amendments to the plan, as they've even said themselves, that could change the face of the entire plan. So if we're going to, for purposes of Bill 32-33 as amended, try to say if the adoption of the master plan requires the demolition, then I would ask that, I mean, if you want the Hagåtña Redevelopment or Restoration and Redevelopment Authority to take a position, then maybe we should just require them by resolution to say that so far their proposed plans include the demolition of the DOA building. Remember, we had a presentation last night and they came up with some drawings and some renditions of different work groups that gave input, and in every single drawing that they presented, it had some other idea for that particular space. And so if you want to get, and they've been on the record that they support the bill. There's a united front from all these individuals. There's Guam Preservation Trust, the HRRA, the SHPO, and others. If we're still going to tie this to the adoption of the plan, then it still would mean that the demolition of the building can't happen unless the plan is adopted. So respectfully, I don't see any difference in the amended version of this amendment.
Thank you, Senator Respicio. I have the Vice Speaker and then Senators. Senator Nicholas, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. There is actually significant difference between the two amendments, Madam Speaker. The First Amendment speaks to the bill itself, and the bill itself, and this kind of helps us to rewind and reevaluate exactly what we're discussing here. The bill is to authorize the demolition of the building. The amendment, as originally proffered, is to say you cannot demolish it until after the plan is adopted. This new proposal is to say you cannot demolish it unless the plans include the need to demolish the building. It's very different because the current amendment would automatically say we're going to demolish it once a plan is adopted, even if the plan doesn't require demolition. This amendment says you only demolish if the plan requires demolition. In other words, if the Hagåtña Restoration Redevelopment Authority were to listen in on the session and say, you know what, there may be historical significance, let's not demolish the building, let's go ahead and renovate it and preserve it. Because the original amendment does not keep that door open, then that wouldn't be the case. Otherwise, the plan as adopted would conflict with the with 32-33. So, just rewinding a bit, the idea that we're being presumptive of 32-33 passing, I think it's important for us to extrapolate that if it does pass, this is what's going to happen. And so if 32-33 does pass without this amendment, we're going to demolish that building. If it passes with the original amendment, we're going to demolish it, but not until a plan is adopted, whatever that plan may be. This amendment to this amendment says we're only going to demolish it if the plan that's adopted requires the demolition. So I think it's important for us to really come back to center and acknowledge that if we're going to be moving this forward, for what reason are we going to move it forward? And if it's to fit into the overall picture of a master plan that's being adopted to revitalize the capital, then let's make sure that we're demolishing it as it fits into that plan. But right now, as was revealed throughout the course of the dialogue today, the plan hasn't even been finalized or adopted. And so why are we going to rush to tear down the building when the plan might not include demolition in the end, in its end product? And that makes a lot of sense to me. Maybe we should only demolish the building after the plan actually says, yeah, demolishing is part of our overall objective here. That doesn't take anything away from all the previous arguments of historical significance and whether we should demolish it or not. But if we do pass Bill 32, if it passes, it might not, but if it does, are we going to tear it down on day one? Are we going to tear it down after any plan is adopted? Or are we going to tear it down only if it's part of the master plan? So that's what we're deliberating right now here today with the amendment to the amendment as proffered by Senator Underwood. The amendment to the amendment makes sense. It's hard to track, but it makes sense that if we're going to tear the building down, perhaps we should only do it if the final plan calls for it. hopefully that plan can get moved through the system quickly. But if it, if it takes longer, then at least the demolition of the building would still be taken into context of whether or not it's actually going to fit in with the overall plan as it's finally adopted. So, we talk about 6 in one and half a dozen on the other. We can also talk about putting the cart before the horse, and maybe we shouldn't tear something down until the final plan actually calls for it. That's what this amendment, the amendment is asking us to consider. Don't tear it down unless it actually calls for it. I can probably go along with that. My original objections to the amendment as originally written was demolition was a foregone conclusion. If 32-33 passed, we would just be delaying demolition until a plan is adopted, but no matter what, we're going to demolish. With this amendment to the amendment, we're saying you can demolish, but only if the final plan that we adopt calls for it. That I can get behind. So I just wanted to help us kind of streamline where we are, 32-33, what the original amendment is going to do as it with respect to 32-33, and what this new amendment to the amendment will do, and how it's all different, because it really is significantly different, Madam Speaker. The original amendment I wouldn't really support because it's just delaying the demolition, but it's demolition under any circumstance. We're going to do it eventually. But this new language makes demolition only a condition of the actual plan is adopted. And again, it all boils down to, do we have a plan to adopt? And the answer right now is no. And so do we want to demolish before we have that plan? Demolition cannot be turned back. And so that's a big thing to really factor into the whole equation. But I'd like to express my thanks to the mover of this new consideration. I think that it is something that I can support. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator San Nicolas. I also have the Vice Speaker who wishes to speak on the proposed amendment to the amendment. Vice Speaker, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I apologize to my colleagues that in my passion I may have overstated myself. But I thought that my amendment, as I originally introduced it, was for that fact, because as the last speaker stated, if you demolish it, there's no turning back. It's finished. And kicking the can down the road for a couple of months, let's kick it, but we're not responsible for the kicking. They have all the power to be able to have this plan on this legislative floor before July, before August, whenever they decide that they're going to move. All I'm saying is nothing happens to that building until we approve a plan. And as the senator from Zonia explained in his stating the statute for HRRA, it requires both legislative action and gubernatorial appointment. So I want to make sure that if the amendment that's being proffered by the senator from Zonia, from Tamuning, is more acceptable, all I'd ask is that we add that for the purposes of this section, adoption shall mean passage of a legislative measure signed by the Makatlahi Guahan. Because I just don't want anybody to think that this later in time not having that requirement, though in the earlier statute from 1997, it states that, I want to make sure that the plan has to be approved by this legislature.
Okay.
All I'm asking in this amendment is no demolition until a plan is approved. And I apologize if my amendment was not clear, and if this one's clearer, fine. Just add what adoption means to include the governor and this legislative approval.
So, Vice Speaker, I'm going to go ahead and entertain Senator Underwood's amendment to your amendment, and then we'll clean up if you need to delete it as amended, because that's the way it sounds. And so what I'll go ahead and do is, and if we can call everybody in, on the Senator Underwood amendment to the to Vice Speaker's main amendment, are there any objections?
Madam Speaker, if I may ask for at least a minute recess, and I'll state why. There's been good discussion and good debate, and I think we need to at least sit down. I know I need to give it some thought,
Okay.
and as opposed to proffering a vote right now. Just a
We'll-
minute or two,
We'll
Madam
take
Speaker.
a brief recess.
Thank you.
This legislature is back from recess. As I understand it, after the brief discussion, there have been some new formulating amendments, so I'm going to go ahead and address both Senator Underwood and Vice Speaker Cruz to go ahead and withdraw their amendments, and then I'll entertain Senator Underwood for the newly formulated amendment. So, Senator Underwood, can you rise to withdraw your amendment?
Yes, Madam Speaker, thank you. I withdraw my amendment.
On that motion, without any objection, motion carries. Vice Speaker Cruz?
I guess I'm withdrawing mine also so that there's going to be a new amendment.
On that motion? No objection, motion carries. Senator Underwood, you still have the floor. On the Underwood Amendment, does anybody wish to speak? Senator Tom Atta, Assistant Majority Leader, you're recognized.
I just need to understand, what do we mean by passage of a legislative measure? Is that a bill? Is that a resolution? Oh, so then, okay, so if it has to be signed by a governor, then I guess all right, then. But maybe legislative measure could be made more clearly. Isn't there another word? Passage of legislation signed into law by, yeah, I guess that would probably be.
Do you want to amend that,
Yeah.
Senator Atta?
Yeah, so I'll just amend it to read on the last line there, passage of legislation signed into law by Magalahin Guahan.
On that amendment to Underwood's main amendment, are there any objections? Senator Tony Atta, do you wish to? Excuse me? There's an objection. Would you wish to speak? There's an objection. Anyone else wishing to speak on that? Senator Tom Atta's amendment to the Underwood's main amendment was to delete the legislative measure and read on the last line, after adoption shall mean the passage of a legislation signed into law by Imagala and Guahan. That was the amendment. That was the Atta amendment, the Tom Atta. Yes, sir. Anyone wishing to speak? There was an objection. Anyone else wishing to speak? If not, Senator Underwood, you want to close or call for the vote? Call for the vote. Oh. That's it. Right, and there was an objection to.
But you do the amendment to the amendment first, and then you go to the amendment after.
You can go ahead. Yeah, I can speak on it, Madam.
Senator Atta, just for justification's sake, you objected to the amendment to the Tom Atta's
Right,
insertion
yes.
of legislation. Okay?
Yes, and it's nothing. No, but you know, Madam Speaker, and I've been sitting here all this. We've been at it for a couple of hours now, and I'm pretty sure everyone here, one way or another, has grown up here in Agana. And I grew up here in Agana because my grandmother, Tanlolitea, used to live here, and I stayed at her house. You know, every year we do the Lansing Corpus, we set up and prepare for the procession. Her residence was actually Archbishop Flores' personal home. And I had the privilege of actually cleaning every day the Archbishop's residence when he was just a bishop. I walked the streets of Agana. I walked the streets all the way from the old Acme store way down by Adelup, all the way up to the old Townhouse department store. I would stop by Mark's Walgreen and buy a bag of pistachio nuts. You know, walking by Dairy Queen and picking up an ice cream cone. Looking into the windows of Eileen Kershaw. And then walking past the old Catholic Medical Clinic, the old medical center. And after that, I would sit right in front of the Agana Theater and see what movies are showing before I make my way through Hulali's to buy my grandmother a pack of cigarette at the Orient. Then she would send me up to Mariana Sales and Tendanini, owned by the Underwoods, to pick up material so that she can sew some dresses. Towards the end of the day, I would walk back to the legislature, which is abandoned today, and sit in my father's office, which was a mobile home, and wait for him to get off. So while I was waiting there, I would run over to the administration building, go up to the second floor, and dangle my feet off the balcony. Many times I walked the streets of Agana. When it rained, I would go over to the Eka family's property where the judiciary is today and wait for their yard to fill up with water before I go and splash in it. And those are memories. That's what you call memories. It's the memories of what you keep in you. It's what you have in you take to heart. Can you imagine if we were to if the old Mark's Walgreen was still standing, there wouldn't be a district court there. If what they call it, look at Mrs. Franquist built a beautiful building right here. If Mariana Sales was still there, is still there, we wouldn't have the Serena building. The legislature, hopefully one day, will be moving from this building, which should have been done 20 years ago, and back into that building. It's not, you're not demolishing your memories. You're just making way for the future. And all this, we're going to wait. When you look at it, I remember the Hong Kong restaurant. Oh, everybody was saying it's an eyesore. We need to take it down. And what would happen? Well, we get DPW to turn around, take it down, and then we'll charge the private landowners for the cost of demolition. The old gun shop down in Tumon. So what's going to happen? We don't pass and move forward. Who's going to turn around and tell the government, well, that building is an eyesore, it needs to come down? And since the legislature is the owner of that building, we would have to be charged for it. We are not taking away memories. You can't take away a memory from you as long as you don't allow them to. All we're doing is making way for the future. The future of our island, the future of our people. I mean, who's to say that when they broke down portions of the old legislative building, that wasn't historical? And that's why I stand in objection to the changes being made. Because I think that every time we prolong something and we wait, that's all that's going to happen. That building is going to stand and deteriorate day by day. And then we're going to wait for someone to get killed in that building because they've been walking around it or what. And then we're going to take action. I just hope that we can just move forward, continue on with our work, and get the seat of government back into the capital. Why it was moved to Adelup, I don't know, but you know what? One day, hopefully, it'll be back here in Agana. Hopefully, all the offices that were in Agana will come back to Agana with a bigger and better building. I mean, that building lived its life. It lived its usefulness. But you know, government has grown. It has grown to work for the island population that has also grown. So, Madam Speaker, that's why my objection is there, is because I think we need to just stop delaying and let's just start moving forward. I mean, everyone has memories of something, you know, be it the old DOA building, be it the legislature building. I mean, the old Lujan's Little Store Big Bargains, they even demolished that and built a new building. But everyone that's passed by there, I know they remember that as Lujan's Little Store Big Bargains. Because that's what their memories tell them, because they remember it. Thank you, Madam Speaker, for allowing me the opportunity to speak on my objection.
Thank you, Senator Tom. So on Senator Tony. Senator Tom, on Senator Tom's amendment to the amendment, anyone else wishing to speak? If not, Senator Tom Atta. Oh, Senator Tom Atta, would you wish to close? Okay, call for the vote. There was an objection. All those in favor of the vote, please signify by raising your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Motion fails. We are still on the Underwood Amendment. Anyone else wishing to speak? If not, are there any objections? There is an objection. All those in favor of the Underwood Amendment, please signify by raising your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Point of order, Madam
Yes.
Speaker.
State your point of order, Senator Espadon.
If my understanding of this is correct, the two previous amendments that were proffered were pulled back. And
Yes, they were.
And as a result, a new amendment was proffered by Senator Underwood. When
Yes.
that hit the floor, Senator Atta made an amendment to the amendment. So he got to speak on the original amendment by Senator Underwood. Now,
Right, so.
but we voted on Senator Atta's amendment to the
Right,
amendment. And now we're back to the amendment proffered
Right,
by.
and I asked if anybody would like to speak. And I
okay.
asked for if there was any, and then there was an objection when nobody spoke, when I was ready to call for the vote. So I have to call for the vote now.
Okay, I apologize then, but thank you, Madam Speaker.
Okay, so on the Underwood Amendment, there was an objection. All those in favor, please signify by raising your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Motion fails. We are still with Vice Speaker Cruz. You still had the floor. You had several amendments.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, my next amendment addresses the issue of the funding. Madam Speaker, you were my vice chair when we passed the hot bond. And in the hot bond, we listed the projects that we wanted to have built with the hotel occupancy tax bond. We had a list of projects. I'm sure you have been reviewing them as the oversight chair. I'm sure you reviewed as the oversight chair the progress of the projects that this legislature intended to have built with that money. And Bill 32 proposes to take some 600,000 at least and some transfer authority by the governor of the hot bond. I'm asking this body to protect what we did as a body when we passed the hot bond. I want to make sure that when we took the hotel occupancy tax and we convinced the hoteliers that we needed to do some things around the island to improve the destination development of Guam with the improvements to the tourist attractions throughout the island, to improve the destination with the building of the museum. And Madam Chair, Madam Speaker, you more than anybody know the progress of the museum and how short we are and the possibility of it not being funded completely. This bill is suggesting that we take 600,000 before the projects are even done. One of the projects that we convinced the hoteliers that we were going to do was the Tumon flood control. That hasn't even been started. The bid hasn't even gone out. And yet we're already proposing to take 600,000 from what little funds, but it's not even enough for the 30 projects that we have, much less the 2 signature projects of the hot bond, the museum and the flood control. So my amendment is, notwithstanding the provisions of the ES Act, any other provision of law, rule, or regulation, no government of Guam funds, regardless of source, including those funds obtained under the authority of 1515 of Article 5, annotated the hot bond law, shall be expended for the demolition of the construction or reconstruction of the MFL Guerrero building unless, 1, the educational facility authorized has publicly operated for no less than 60 days. I want to make sure it's built and it's operating. And the resolution for the San Vitores flooding caused by storm runoff along San Vitores Road north of the Fujita pump station by collecting and removing the storm runoff via transmission, it has operated no less than 60 days. Madam Speaker, I know you're a co-sponsor of this bill, but I hope that you will support any objection to the passage of this to assure that we protect the tourist attractions that we have in the hot bond. And I'm calling out specifically on it. Because GVB has called to ask us to a meeting on Friday to talk about the hot bond. For those in here interested in the farmers market, in the farmers market, I don't know if we're going to have enough to finish that. We haven't started the fishermen's co-op. But we're already taking $600,000 to demolish a building. Historic preservation has $6 million. If it wants, it can take it from there. They're so hell-bent on destroying, demolishing the Guerrero building, then take it out of their funds. But please, leave intact all the funds that we have, what meager funds we have left, to finish what projects we can of that list of 30 in the original hot bond. If they want to find funds elsewhere and take it from HTP, great. Take it from HRRA, great. I don't care. But don't touch the hot bond. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. On the Vice Speaker amendment, I have Majority Leader Respicio and then Senator Morrison. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the presentation by the previous speaker is significantly different from the actual amendment being proposed. If the previous speaker is saying, don't touch the hot bond, but get it out of the Historic Preservation Fund, which we know those monies cannot be expended unless the building is actually in the historic registry. But notwithstanding that, there's also the comment that was get it from some other funding source, but the second line of the amendment says no government of Guam funds shall be expended regardless of source of funding, including those obtained. And then there's two requirements: that the Education Facility Fund operated for no less than 60 calendar days, and that the second is the Fujita pump station is in operation for no less than 60 days. So, you know, this amendment is similar to the amendment that was just defeated, and I stand in opposition to it and to try to clarify for the record that the passage of Bill 32-33 as amended will not prevent the Fujita pump station from going forward, from being constructed, or the plans to be developed and for it to actually be implemented. This, as I said, whatever questions any of our colleagues may have regarding the bill, whatever issue will come up, more than likely it's an issue that's come up in the series of public meetings that we've had. The mover of this amendment brought this matter up, and it was a good discussion, and the GITA administrator said that those funds for the Fujita pump station as well as the funds for the Guam Museum has already been set aside, and what we're talking about here is excess monies from the hot bonds. And be it as it may, I wanted to also protect these projects, and I wanted to give the governor some additional flexibility. In Section 4, it not only talks about the use of all excess funds as needed from the previous hot bond projects identified in Public Law 30-228, but it also authorizes the governor to spend money by way of his transfer authority from within the governor's transfer authority for the purposes of this act. So, you know, if you're just for someone just following along and listening to the presentations, the representations or misrepresentations of the bill, it might be concluded that the passage of this bill would mean that we're not gonna resolve the flooding, the San Vitor's flooding and the issues surrounding the Fujita pump station. But really, this amendment clearly says no government of Guam funds can be expended unless these two categories are met. And there's another 60-day requirement. So this is just nothing more than a delay that I'm asking we not do, and that we make the hard decision with respect to the fate of that particular government building. So I stand in opposition to the amendment.
Thank you, Majority Leader. Senator Morrison, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the previous speaker for clarifying some of the assurances that are in place to not impact some of these hot bond projects. However, I was just looking at some of the projects that are on the list of the hot bond, and I also want to. It was only mentioned the San Matores flooding project that will not be impacted, but however, I just want to have some assurances that there are still some outstanding hot bond projects that are there that still need to even begin or even ground break. So if the author can clarify that that this will also not have impact on these other outstanding projects that are listed in hot bond projects.
Vice Speaker, would you like to yield? Or Senator Respicio? Did you want Senator Respicio or Vice Speaker?
Either one, Madam Speaker, but I think the author was actually leading to that an answer, but I was.
So
only
you want the author
specific.
of the
Yes.
of the main bill? Okay, I'm going to ask Senator Respicio. His question was would there be any impacts of the hot bonds? Right.
You know, I guess it's what was reported to us by the GITA administrator, saying that there would be no impact to the current hot bond projects as identified by this public law. But if it would provide some additional comfort, I'm not opposed to just removing the hot bond entirely as a funding source. And as the mover of the amendment said, let the governor find the money to be able to go forward with the demolition and the landscaping and the lighting, the ground lighting. But the only thing I caution this body is to not think that the monies in the Historic Preservation Trust can be used, because it can only be used for a specific purpose. So if we want some additional assurances, maybe I can call for a minute recess to just confirm, because I'm not doing this bill alone. It's in collaboration with the governor and with his senior staff, right? So if you give me just a couple of minutes to verify, for me personally, Madam Speaker, I would not be opposed to just removing the hot bond proceeds, whether it's excess or otherwise, because the mover of the amendment did bring up a point that the operational requirement of the Guam Museum may be short. So whether you get that money from the hot bond or get it from the general fund, I think it's just one and the same. But you're right, and he's right. The Vice Speaker's right. If there's a desire to move forward, then maybe we're going to challenge the administration to be creative in how they're going to pay for this. But my additional language says the governor shall, but I want to make sure that language is suitable. So can I request a minute recess?
Definitely. We'll go into a brief recess. I know it's almost 5, but I'm going to go ahead and give you that time for a brief recess. This legislature is back in session. I'm going to go ahead and address the majority leader based on this updated information. Majority Leader, you're recognized.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Speaker, for the recess. I move that we recess till 9 a.m. To give us some time to regroup and make the determination that if we remove the hot bond as a funding source, which I'm supportive of, that if the remaining language is sufficient for the governor to use this transfer authority to find the necessary funds to make this project possible. So I move that we recess till 9 a.m.
On that motion, this legislature is in recess.